The radio crackle was static as Sam Reynolds reported his coordinates. 3 days tracking wildlife through Montana's remote Bitterroot Mountains had yielded nothing extraordinary until now. Through his camera lens, he observed something that made him question reality itself. A wounded mother bear, severely malnourished and limping badly, locked eyes with him from across a small stream. Wildlife experts spend lifetimes documenting bear behavior, but what happened next had no precedent in scientific literature. Instead of charging to protect her young or fleeing into the underbrush, the mother bear began shepherding her 2 cubs toward Sam. The cubs resisted, whimpering as she firmly nudged them across the shallow water. When they reached the opposite bank, just feet from where Sam stood paralyzed with disbelief, the mother bear made a sound unlike anything he'd ever heard. Not a growl of aggression, but a soft, almost pleading moan. Then, with one final nudge, she retreated into the forest, leaving her cubs behind. Sam's split-second decision that followed, and the groundbreaking discovery he made, would ultimately rewrite the relationship between humans and wildlife in ways no one could have imagined. Sam remained motionless long after the mother bear disappeared into trees. The 2 small cubs huddled together just yards away, their eyes wide with fear. Every instinct told Sam to back away slowly. Mother bears were known to be fiercely protective, sometimes staging false retreats only to charge when humans approached their young. But something about this encounter felt different. The mother bear had been deliberate in her actions, almost human in her apparent decision-making. As a wildlife photographer with 15 years of experience, Sam had documented countless animal behaviors. He had witnessed the brutal efficiency of nature and the surprising gentleness that sometimes emerged between species. But never had he seen anything like this. The mother bear had clearly been injured, her right hind leg dragging slightly as she walked. More concerning was her thin frame, ribs visible even through her thick fur, suggesting she had not been eating well for some time. Sam slowly raised his camera, capturing images of the 2 cubs. Through his telephoto lens, he could see they were also undernourished, their fur dull and patchy in places. The larger of the 2 kept pawing at its mouth in an unusual manner. Something was definitely wrong with these bears. Sam wondered if the mother bear somehow knew she could not care for her cubs in her weakened state. Had she somehow recognized that a human might be able to help? The thought was absurd, against everything science taught about wild animal behavior. Yet Sam could not shake the feeling that he had just witnessed something extraordinary, a desperate mother making an impossible choice. The story of the mother bear began months earlier, though Sam would only piece this together later. Spring had come late to the Bitterroot Mountains that year. The female grizzly, later identified by her distinctive scar pattern as a bear researchers called Sierra, had emerged from hibernation with 2 newborn cubs. Sierra was known to local wildlife researchers as a successful mother who had raised several cubs to adulthood in previous years. But this year was different. Unusually harsh weather patterns had depleted the berry bushes that normally provided essential nutrition. The salmon run had been sparse, leaving many predators competing for limited food resources. Sierra, like many bears in the region, had been forced to venture closer to human settlements in search of food. 3 weeks before her encounter with Sam, Sierra had stumbled upon an illegal hunting camp. Drawn by the scent of improperly stored food, she had been caught in a crude trap meant for smaller animals. The metal teeth had snapped shut on her hind leg, causing a deep wound that became infected. Though she managed to break free, the injury severely limited her mobility and hunting ability. Wildlife officials would later find evidence that Sierra had encountered poachers who shot at her but only managed to graze her shoulder. The combination of food scarcity, injury, and the constant threat of human danger had pushed the once mighty predator to the brink of starvation. Her body had begun shutting down non-essential functions, prioritizing survival over everything else. Perhaps most telling about Sierra's desperate situation was her milk production. Analysis of the cub's condition later showed signs of malnutrition consistent with a mother whose milk had nearly dried up. In the world of wild bears, nature offers few options. Cubs unable to receive proper nutrition typically perish, and mothers sometimes abandon weaker cubs to focus resources on stronger ones with better chances of survival. Sierra faced an impossible situation. Too weak to hunt effectively and unable to produce sufficient milk for her cubs, she would likely watch them slowly starve. The maternal instinct that had successfully guided her through previous years now faced an unprecedented challenge. Her interactions with humans had been mostly negative, yet she had observed enough to know that humans sometimes helped injured animals. Scientists would later debate whether Sierra's actions represented true cognitive reasoning or simply desperate instinct. What was clear from the evidence was that Sierra's condition had deteriorated to a critical point. The day before meeting Sam, trail cameras had captured her struggling to walk, stopping frequently to rest, her cubs growing weaker by the hour. Whether driven by pure instinct or something more, Sierra made a decision that defied conventional understanding of wildlife behavior. With her own survival uncertain and her cubs fading, she approached a human, the very species she had learned to fear, and did something extraordinary. Sam Reynolds had not planned to be in this particular section of the Bitterroot Mountains. His original assignment for National Geographic focused on documenting the recovery of wolf populations in the northern ranges. A sudden spring storm had forced him to alter his route, pushing him eastward into less familiar territory. The detour proved fortunate, as it positioned him precisely where Sierra would make her desperate approach. The morning of the encounter started like any other day in the field for Sam. He woke before sunrise, prepared a simple breakfast on his portable stove, and packed his equipment for a day of tracking and photography. An experienced outdoorsman, Sam moved quietly through the forest, disturbing little as he followed signs of wildlife activity. His training had taught him to blend into his surroundings, becoming almost invisible to the animals he hoped to photograph. Sam had been following a series of tracks along the stream when he first sensed something watching him. Years in the wilderness had honed his instincts. He slowly raised his head from the viewfinder of his camera and scanned the tree line. At first, he saw nothing unusual among the pine and aspen. Then a subtle movement caught his eye, the distinctive shape of a grizzly bear partially hidden behind a fallen log. Protocol for such encounters was clear. Avoid eye contact, make yourself appear larger, back away slowly, and have bear spray ready. But Sam remained still, his trained eye noticing immediately that something was wrong with this bear. Her movements were labored, her coat dull and matted. Even from a distance, he could see she was severely underweight for a female grizzly, especially one with cubs. Sierra watched Sam for nearly 20 minutes, neither advancing nor retreating. The behavior confused Sam, who had documented dozens of bear encounters. Typically, a mother with cubs would either aggressively drive off potential threats or quickly move her young to safety. This bear seemed to be studying him, almost assessing him. When Sierra finally moved, she did so with what appeared to be deliberate calm. She emerged fully from behind the log, allowing Sam to see her clearly for the first time. The severity of her condition became immediately apparent. Her right hind leg dragged slightly, leaving an uneven track in the soft earth. What Sam initially took for patches of different colored fur turned out to be open wounds on her shoulder and flank. Most shocking was when Sierra turned slightly, revealing the two small cubs huddled behind her. They appeared weak and unsteady, one noticeably smaller than the other. The larger cub kept pawing at his mouth in an unusual, repetitive motion that immediately signaled to Sam that something was wrong. Sierra began moving toward the stream that separated them, her eyes never leaving Sam's position. Every instinct and training protocol told Sam to retreat, yet something in the bear's demeanor kept him rooted to the spot. She was not displaying any of the typical pre-charge behaviors. No ear flattening, no head swaying, no huffing sounds. Instead, she moved with purpose, her attention divided between Sam and ensuring her cubs followed. It was a moment that would soon challenge everything wildlife experts thought they knew about animal behavior and cognition. Sierra stood at the edge of the stream, her massive form reflected in the clear mountain water. The morning sun filtered through the trees, casting dappled light across the scene. Sam remained perfectly still, his camera capturing what was unfolding before him. His breathing slowed as he watched Sierra test the water with one paw before slowly wading into the shallow stream. What happened next defied everything known about bear behavior. Sierra turned toward her cubs and made a low grunting sound. The cubs hesitated at the water's edge, clearly reluctant to follow. Sierra returned to them, gently nudging the larger cub toward the water. Again, the cub resisted, making small whimpering sounds. Sierra repeated the process, this time more firmly, pushing both cubs toward the stream. Sam watched in astonishment as Sierra shepherded her cubs across the water. The smaller cub stumbled in the current, nearly being swept downstream before Sierra caught it with her mouth, gently placing it back on course. The cubs' weakness was evident in their labored movements, each step seemingly requiring tremendous effort. When they reached the middle of the stream, Sierra paused. She raised her head and looked directly at Sam with an intensity that sent chills down his spine. In that gaze, Sam would later recall, there seemed to be something beyond animal instinct, a deliberate communication that transcended species barriers. Sierra continued moving forward, now actively pushing her cubs toward the bank where Sam stood. The cubs reached Sam's side of the stream, their small bodies trembling with exhaustion and fear. They huddled together just 15 feet from where Sam remained frozen in place. Sierra followed them onto the bank but stopped short, maintaining a distance that seemed carefully calculated. Close enough to watch her cubs, but far enough to signal she was not approaching Sam. Sierra made a sound unlike any bear vocalization Sam had ever heard in his 15 years of wildlife observation. It wasn't the typical grunt, roar, or huff associated with bears, but rather a softer, almost mournful sound that seemed to carry emotional weight. She looked from her cubs to Sam and back again, repeating this motion several times as if trying to communicate something specific. Then came the moment that would later be analyzed by wildlife behaviorists around the world. Sierra nudged her cubs one final time in Sam's direction. The larger cub took a few reluctant steps forward before stopping, while the smaller one remained huddled in place. Sierra repeated the action, more insistently this time. When the cub still hesitated, Sierra did something truly remarkable. She sat down, creating a clear visual separation between herself and her offspring. Sierra's final action removed any doubt about her intentions. She backed away slowly, maintaining eye contact with Sam until she reached the tree line. There, she stood watching for several minutes, her body half hidden by the foliage. Then, with one last look at her cubs, Sierra turned and disappeared into the forest. The cubs, now alone, huddled together on the bank, their soft whimpers carried across the clearing as they occasionally looked toward where their mother had vanished. An unprecedented transfer of trust had occurred. A wild mother bear had voluntarily surrendered her cubs to a human stranger. For several minutes after Sierra disappeared, Sam remained motionless, processing what had just happened. The cubs huddled together, occasionally looking toward the forest where their mother had vanished. Slowly, carefully, Sam set down his camera equipment and reached for his satellite phone. Wildlife rescue would need to be notified immediately. But before making the call, Sam knew he needed to assess the cubs' condition. Using his knowledge of wildlife behavior, he approached them with extreme caution. The cubs, weakened by hunger and apparently abandoned by their mother, made no attempt to flee. The smaller cub lay on its side, breathing shallowly. The larger one continued that strange pawing motion at its mouth that Sam had noticed earlier. Sam knelt nearby, giving the cub space while observing them closely. His years of working with wildlife conservation projects had taught him to look for specific signs of distress or illness. The cubs fur lacked a healthy sheen typical of well-nourished bear cubs. Their eyes were dull, and their breathing seemed labored. But it was a larger cub's mouth that drew Sam's primary concern. Keeping a respectful distance, Sam used his camera's telephoto lens to zoom in on the cub's face. What he saw made his heart sink. The cub's jaw appeared swollen and misshapen. Each time it pawed at its mouth, it whimpered in pain. Sam adjusted his position to get a better angle, and what he saw next would become the discovery that changed everything. Protruding from the cub's gums was a metal object that reflected the morning sunlight. Sam zoomed in further and felt his stomach tighten. Embedded deep in the cub's jaw was what appeared to be a fragment of a wire snare, likely from the same type of trap that had injured Sierra. The metal had cut through the cub's gum and was now deeply embedded in the jawbone itself. Sam quickly examined the smaller cub as well, noticing similar swelling around its neck. Using his camera again, he discovered a thin metal wire partially hidden beneath the fur, cutting into the cub's throat. Both cubs had apparently been caught in poachers' traps and somehow freed by their mother, but not before metal components had broken off and remained embedded in their bodies. The discovery explained everything. Why the cubs were so weak, why they couldn't eat properly, why Sierra couldn't help them despite her best efforts. The foreign objects were slowly killing the cubs, and Sierra, despite her intelligence and maternal devotion, lacked the means to remove them. Sam now understood the desperation that had driven Sierra to her unprecedented action. What Sam realized in that moment was that these cubs were suffering from something no wildlife rescue had ever successfully treated in the field. The metal fragments were causing infections that were spreading throughout their small bodies. Without immediate and specialized intervention, they would not survive more than a day or two longer. Sam knew the cubs needed immediate medical attention. He reached for his satellite phone and called the Montana Wildlife Response Unit, quickly explaining the situation. The dispatcher informed him that the nearest rescue team was at least 4 hours away. Given the cubs' critical condition, Sam feared they might not survive that long. Before becoming a wildlife photographer, Sam had worked as a field medic for wildlife conservation projects in Africa. He had assisted veterinarians with emergency procedures on injured animals, though never on bears and certainly never alone. The ethical dilemma weighed heavily on him. Attempting to help might cause more harm, but doing nothing would almost certainly result in the cubs' deaths. Sam made a decision that would later be described as either incredibly brave or foolishly reckless, depending on who was telling the story. He returned to his campsite and retrieved his emergency field kit, which contained basic medical supplies he carried for personal use and occasional wildlife emergencies. After donning latex gloves, Sam prepared a mild sedative solution using the limited supplies in his kit. The dosage was a calculated risk. Too much could kill the already weakened cubs. Too little would leave them conscious and potentially dangerous, even in their weakened state. Sam had observed enough veterinary procedures to understand the basics, but he was far from a professional wildlife veterinarian. He approached the cub slowly, speaking in soft, soothing tones. The larger cub, the one with the metal embedded in its jaw, seemed too weak to resist as Sam carefully administered the sedative. The smaller cub required more coaxing, but eventually submitted to Sam's gentle handling. Within minutes, both cubs were in a sedated state, allowing Sam to examine them more closely. What Sam did next would later be recognized as pioneering a new approach to field wildlife medicine. Using the clean water from his canteen, he carefully washed the areas around the embedded metal fragments. The infections were worse than he initially thought, with pus and inflammation extending deep into surrounding tissue. Sam sterilized his multi-tool, using alcohol and flame. Then, with steady hands guided by adrenaline and determination, he began the delicate process of removing the metal fragment from the larger cub's jaw. The procedure required extreme precision. The fragment had embedded itself perilously close to a major artery. One wrong move could cause fatal bleeding. For nearly 40 minutes, Sam worked meticulously, occasionally pausing to check the cub's breathing and pulse. Sweat dripped from his forehead as he finally extracted the metal fragment, a 2-inch piece of serrated wire from an illegal trap. The smaller cub situation was equally precarious, with the wire wrapped dangerously close to its trachea. After successfully removing both foreign objects, Sam faced another challenge. The wounds were deep and severely infected. Traditional wildlife treatment would involve leaving the wounds open to drain, but Sam recognized that these cubs needed something more. Drawing on his knowledge of recent advancements in field medicine, Sam prepared a solution he had previously used only on himself, a mixture of honey, which he carried as a natural antiseptic, and a crushed antibiotic tablet from his personal medical kit. This unconventional approach reflected Sam's desperate improvisation in an unprecedented situation. He carefully cleaned the wounds again and applied the mixture, packing the deeper parts of the injuries to prevent further infection. Then he fashioned simple bandages from his clean, spare clothing, securing them around the cub's injuries as best he could. Throughout this improvised medical intervention, Sam documented the process with his camera set on automatic timer. Little did he know that these images would later become the foundation for a revolutionary approach to wildlife field medicine, one that would challenge conventional protocols and save countless animal lives around the world. As Sam finished treating the cubs, he heard the distant sound of helicopter blades. The wildlife rescue team was arriving sooner than expected. Sam prepared to hand over the sedated cubs, unaware that his unprecedented intervention had just changed the course of wildlife conservation history. The wildlife rescue team that arrived by helicopter included Dr. Meera Patel, a veterinarian specializing in large predator medicine. Initially skeptical of Sam's emergency intervention, Dr. Patel's assessment of the cubs quickly turned to amazement. The honey antibiotic mixture Sam had improvised was already showing remarkable effectiveness, reducing inflammation and creating an antimicrobial barrier that traditional field treatments couldn't match. The cubs were airlifted to the Montana Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, where they received professional care. Blood tests revealed that the infection had been severe enough that without Sam's intervention, the cubs likely would have died before reaching the facility. Dr. Patel was particularly intrigued by the effectiveness of Sam's improvised treatment and requested detailed information about the exact mixture he had used. 3 weeks later, Sam received an unexpected call from Dr. Patel. The cubs were making a remarkable recovery, but more importantly, the medical team had analyzed and refined Sam's honey antibiotic formula. Tests in laboratory settings had confirmed what Sam's desperate improvisation had accidentally discovered. The specific combination created a powerful synergistic effect, particularly effective against the types of infections commonly found in wildlife injured by human-made objects. Word of this discovery spread rapidly through wildlife medicine circles. Within months, the Reynolds Protocol, as it became known, was being tested in wildlife rehabilitation centers across North America. The results were consistently impressive: faster healing times, reduced scarring, and significantly higher survival rates for wildlife with deep tissue infections. The true global breakthrough came 6 months after Sam's encounter with Sierra and her cubs. The International Wildlife Medicine Conference in Geneva featured a presentation by Dr. Patel on the Reynolds Protocol. Representatives from conservation organizations across 6 continents attended the session, many skeptical that such a simple solution could outperform expensive conventional treatments. The turning point was the presentation of Sam's photographic documentation alongside the medical data. The before and after images of the bear cubs, combined with similar results from other species, provided compelling evidence that could not be ignored. By the end of the conference, conservation teams from 27 countries had requested training in the technique. Perhaps most significant was the protocol's accessibility. Unlike many advanced medical treatments that required expensive equipment or refrigeration, the Reynolds Protocol could be prepared from locally available materials in almost any environment. This meant wildlife rescue teams in remote regions of developing nations, who previously had limited options for treating serious infections in the field, now had an effective, affordable solution. Within a year, the Reynolds Protocol had become standard procedure in wildlife rescue operations worldwide, saving thousands of animals that previously would have been lost. Sam's desperate attempt to save 2 bear cubs had inadvertently revolutionized wildlife field medicine across the globe. The story of Sam Reynolds and the bear cubs captured global attention after National Geographic published his photographs alongside an article detailing the extraordinary encounter. What began as a wildlife photography assignment transformed into an international phenomenon that transcended scientific circles and entered popular culture. Conservation organizations worldwide celebrated Sam's innovation. The World Wildlife Fund presented him with their highest honor, the Gold Medal for Conservation Innovation, at a ceremony attended by representatives from 64 countries. The United Nations Environment Program featured the Reynolds Protocol in their annual report, citing it as one of the most significant advances in wildlife protection in decades. Wildlife documentary teams from 3 continents descended on Montana to film segments on Sierra's cubs, now thriving at the rehabilitation center. The cubs, named Hope and Chance by public vote in an online campaign that went viral, became ambassadors for wildlife conservation. Their story was translated into 27 languages and included in school curriculums worldwide as an example of human-wildlife cooperation and innovation. Perhaps most meaningful to Sam was the establishment of the Reynolds Wildlife Medicine Initiative, funded by an international coalition of conservation groups. The program trained field researchers and indigenous communities in remote areas to apply the protocol in wildlife emergencies. Within 18 months, the initiative had established training centers in Africa, South America, and Southeast Asia, focusing on regions with high levels of human-wildlife conflict and limited access to veterinary resources. Unexpected recognition came from the medical community when researchers at Johns Hopkins University discovered that a modified version of the Reynolds protocol showed promise for treating antibiotic-resistant infections in human patients. Clinical trials began exploring applications for treating wounds in disaster zones and conflict areas where traditional medical infrastructure was compromised. Sam Reynolds, once known only in wildlife photography circles, found himself addressing the United Nations General Assembly on World Wildlife Day. His message was simple but powerful. Innovations that save wildlife often begin with compassion and improvisation rather than large budgets and advanced technology. The story of one man's encounter with a desperate mother bear had evolved into a global movement reimagining how humans and wildlife could coexist and help each other in unexpected ways. The most touching recognition, however, came in the form of trail camera footage captured 6 months after the rescue. Sierra, her wounds healed and her strength recovered, was documented watching her cubs from a distance as they played in their large enclosure at the rehabilitation center. Somehow, the mother bear had tracked her cubs and seemed to be checking on their welfare, a behavior never before documented in previously wild bears. Before Sam Reynolds' encounter with Sierra and her cubs, wildlife medicine followed a conservative approach, especially in field conditions. Standard protocols typically involve minimal intervention until animals reach specialized facilities, resulting in countless wildlife deaths during transport or while waiting for professional care. The Reynolds protocol fundamentally transformed this paradigm, ushering in a new era of wildlife emergency medicine. Within 2 years of the protocol's introduction, wildlife rescue organizations worldwide reported a 64% increase in survival rates for animals with serious infections from human-made hazards. The implications were particularly significant for endangered species, where every individual animal represented a meaningful percentage of remaining populations. The most dramatic transformation occurred in how rescue teams approached injured wildlife in remote locations. Previously, the focus had been on rapid transport to centralized facilities, often requiring hours or days of travel during which an animal's condition could deteriorate beyond saving. The Reynolds protocol enabled effective field treatment that stabilized injured animals before transport, creating a critical window of opportunity that saved countless lives. Conservation technology evolved rapidly to support this new approach. Compact field kits containing the necessary components for the Reynolds protocol became standard equipment for wildlife rangers and researchers worldwide. Smartphone apps allowed field personnel with minimal training to correctly apply the treatment based on species-specific guidelines developed by veterinary specialists. The revolution extended beyond treatment methods to fundamentally change how conservation organizations structure their operations. Rather than centralizing all medical capabilities in a few locations, resources were redistributed to support more extensive networks of smaller field stations equipped with basic but effective treatment capabilities. This decentralized approach meant injured wildlife could receive critical care within the crucial first hours after discovery. Training programs expanded dramatically, with indigenous communities and local conservation staff learning to administer emergency treatments rather than merely transporting injured animals. This empowerment of local stakeholders created a multiplication effect, with treatment capabilities extending to regions previously beyond the reach of traditional wildlife medicine. Perhaps most significant was a shift in how the conservation community viewed field medicine itself. Before the Reynolds protocol, field interventions were considered high-risk last resorts. After widespread adoption, they became recognized as essential first responses that often determined whether an animal would survive. This philosophical transformation opened the door to further innovations in wildlife field medicine, with researchers worldwide exploring new applications of the basic principles Sam had stumbled upon in his desperate attempt to save 2 bear cubs. The transformation extended to veterinary education, with major universities adding field emergency medicine courses to their wildlife veterinary programs. Students now learn that effective wildlife medicine didn't always require sterile operating rooms and sophisticated equipment. Sometimes the most revolutionary treatments began with simple materials and a willingness to try something new. By fundamentally changing both the technical approach and underlying philosophy of wildlife medicine, Sam Reynolds' improvised intervention reshaped an entire field of practice, saving countless animal lives and transforming what was possible in wildlife conservation worldwide. Don't miss our next incredible wildlife story that will leave you speechless. Subscribe to our YouTube channel right now by clicking the button below and hitting the notification bell. Join our community of animal lovers and be the first to witness extraordinary moments between humans and wildlife that are changing our understanding of the natural world forever.